Hello, everyone. Let's talk about chapter 14 of No Man Knows My History, Disaster in Kirtland, and what a disaster it is. I want you to think for a second where you were in 2007, 2008 when the financial recession hit. I was in puberty during that time. I was in middle school, so that was not a time in my life where I was super in interested in economics and things of that nature. So I didn't really totally understand what was going on, but I knew something was going on. And obviously, since then, I've come to understand the magnitude of what was the greatest financial crisis, at least America has seen, if not globally, since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And that was a very interesting time. And of course, we're living in a time right now where the economy was drastically brought to a halt by the earth being in the grips of a pandemic, which we are going through now, and which has several new variants that seem to arise every time I check the news. And so that's a scary time. So we live in a time of economic uncertainty, and that, I think, helps me resonate with the narrative of this chapter more as we learn about Joseph Smith's speculative banking and the month-long flirtation with financial speculation that ended up embarrassing the church and causing a lot of heartache for a lot of people. I remember when I was in high school, a few years after, as we were still in the recession and kind of just starting to climb out, I remember my dad and I were assigned to home teach a family in our ward that was a good family, and several pretty normal Mormon families, several children of different ages, and they had lost their livelihood because of the 2008 recession. And so it was just an interesting thing to see people in that frame of mind. These were people who really believed that even without a job, they should still pay tithing, very general conference style narrative. That made a big impact on me, seeing people that really believed so much that they were willing to give that much sacrifice, even though they were really, really suffering, especially in that patriarchal society. That's not a good thing that our society is patriarchal, but the thing I want to say is for a man who, if you come from a worldview of Mormonism with the family proclamation, where the man is responsible for providing for their family, that puts an intense pressure on a father and husband when they're not bringing in any income. That's a really troubling thing, and I think a lot of people experienced a lot of trauma from not being able to fulfill what they believed were divinely inspired roles given to them through revelation. So Kirtland is in the 1830s. These people are living in a different world. I was born in the 1990s, so I don't even know what the world was like without a credit card. I pay for almost everything I buy, including paying my bills, with a credit card, and then just pay it off immediately after each month on my monthly statement. I can't even imagine living in a world where like one state of Ohio has, it says, at least 300 different kinds of authorized notes. I mean, these people are, that really hammers home how different of a universe these people were living in, where they didn't have these like centralized financial institutions that govern our financial landscape today in the developed world did not exist yet, or were at least in their very infancy. So it's just really interesting to kind of put your head in that mind space. Remember that these are frontier farmers. These are the people, a lot of the people that went west of the original 13 colonies were kind of the outcasts, or people who were not fitting the mold or just didn't happen to be born into that aristocratic leadership class that has ruled America since its founding, still led today by dynastic political families. So that hasn't gone away. It's important to remember, just for context, what Kirtland really looked like and how different it is to us today. The bank was said, and I'm quoting, to have been established by a revelation from God. It's incredibly important that everything we talk about with the Safety Society has to be remembered in the context that these people believed that this was basically like Zion's Bank, which is a literal bank in the state of Utah and maybe elsewhere. But people literally believed that the Kirtland Safety Society was a revelation from God, similar to how in 2015 there was a policy by LDS church leaders that was leaked and caused a great amount of kerfuffle amongst the members about discriminating against LGBTQ children and parents. And that 2015 policy change was said to have been guided by revelation, and then when they rescinded that policy and reverted it back to the previous policy in 2018, they said, it was just, I don't remember what they said, but they basically downgraded it from direct revelation from God and kind of tried to sweep it under the rug as simply just a policy like nothing else. But same thing's happening here. These people think that the Kirtland Bank is quite literally the bank of God, and that is a safe place to invest, I think, or at least I think they thought that. Now, they run into trouble because the Ohio legislature refuses to incorporate the bank, and that, of course, is another one of the very many instances Joseph Smith could reasonably conclude that everyone in the government is out to get him. Now, there's lots of reasons why Joseph Smith deserves to have been sued or brought to court and things like that. Not saying he didn't deserve some of the litigation brought against him, of course, but it does seem like this is yet another example of people using legislative prejudice to infringe on the rights of the people of Kirtland because of their religion, which, in my opinion, from the American constitutional legal standpoint, that's wrong. That's not justifiable. So I don't like seeing the government, the secular or just not Mormon government, go to such great lengths to give Mormons a hard time. In this case, they may have had like a legitimate reason, like, you guys aren't financiers, we're not going to let you be a banker, which is, in that case, would make a lot of sense. At any rate. So, when I read this book shortly after I left the church and was in the thick of the consuming phase of my faith transition, where everything in my life was about Mormonism and walking away from it. When I read this chapter and learned about the bank and the facade of the silver over the bins that said it had $1,000. So if you go to the bank and you see the bank vault, they have shelves with boxes, and it says $1,000 on each box. That looks pretty imposing. We have to also remember, I don't know off the top of my head how much $1,000 was worth back then, but suffice it to say, it was considerably more than $1,000. Basically, it was a lot of money, especially for Frontier, Ohio. So they've got these boxes, each marked $1,000, but it says that actually these boxes were filled with sand, lead, old iron, stone, and combustibles, but each had a top layer of bright 50-cent silver coins. Anyone suspicious of the bank's stability was allowed to lift and count the boxes. The effect of these boxes was like magic. They created general confidence in the solidity of the bank. And that beautiful paper money went like hotcakes. For about a month, it was the best money in the country. This anecdote made my jaw drop. the facade of these silver coins on top of the totally mundane, relatively worthless items underneath is, in my opinion, one of the best metaphors that we can give for the modern mainstream Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That they have a facade of humanitarian interests and prestigious academic institutions where people can get graduate degrees and get law clerkships, and they look really smart and well prepared to enter into the white collar workplace. So we've got the modern church propping itself up. Jeffrey R. Holland is saying that there's a new stake formed every week, which if you follow the news surrounding church membership, that's just a lie, or a convenient, an alternate truth, as it were. That metaphor, I think, resonates with me so strongly because underneath that veneer, that gilded facade, is all of the problems of the modern church that nobody wants to talk about except for people who are leaving. To make matters worse, the prophet of the Mormon Church, President Russell M. Nelson, recently stated, I think in 2020 General Conference, that people who are doubting their faith and considering leaving the church would do better for themselves if they did not rehearse their doubts with fellow doubters. In other words, he's saying, if you're feeling like you're questioning whether you want to continue being in the church, you should only have discourse about that decision-making process with people who have a vested interest in you staying faithful and staying a faithful tithe-paying member of the church, which I believe is not healthy, because people who are questioning and want answers to those questions deserve to seek truth from a wide variety of sources. And it's been extremely well documented on the internet that the Mormon Church has done a great deal, spent a lot of energy and money on making it more difficult for people to come to accurate depictions of the church's history and past doctrines. They have made it hard for people to get that truth if you only stick to what the church considers righteous or spiritually worthy sources that will not diminish your faith and leave you stranded to be picked up by the chains of Satan. So the gospel principles manual, which, if I understand correctly, in the modern contemporary Sunday school landscape is not even taught. The new converts instead are, the way it used to be is there was a gospel principles class, which is kind of like Jesus 101. This is how we pay tithing. This is what the plan of salvation is. It was really good. As a missionary, you're invited to teach that class a lot, and I did several times throughout my mission. I really loved those lessons. That manual was really good when I was a believing member. Very concise, had lots of scripture references, and it was awesome. And then there was another class called Gospel Doctrine, which is where established, tenured members of the church go, and they talk about the Bible, the Book of Mormon, and other Mormon scriptures. That changes on a yearly rotation. And so recently they've combined that, which I think is really bad in a lot of ways. In many ways, I wonder if the church would be better off if, instead of studying the Old Testament and Deuteronomy, like, everyone transitioned to gospel principles. But the reason I bring this up is because there's an entire chapter of gospel principles called Honesty. And in it, it talks about how even the smallest acts of dishonesty can diminish our virtue and character, and that we need to be honest and forthright about our intentions with everything that we strive to do, so that we don't abuse other people's agency. That's referred to in philosophy as it's talked about by Immanuel Kant. There's a thing called the categorical imperative, which basically means you should never, that the best way to live one's life and the best way to build a society is that everyone acts as though everyone else is an end into themselves, and you can't trample on someone else's agency. To make that sound a little bit more easy to understand, basically the church's position in that Gospel Principles book is you should always be honest to people, even if the consequences of your honesty will bring harm to you or people you care about, because the truth is more important than those consequences. Ask yourself if you or anyone you know, have that level of integrity. My guess is probably not. I think myself, I try to live my life in a way that is not pleasing to God, because I don't believe in God anymore, but is at least gives me meaning and a sense of fulfillment, and allows me to find comfort and satisfaction with the people around me. I think I do a pretty good job of that, but nobody's perfect. And the church here, with these $1,000 boxes of lies, and it just says, this spirit of the gilded facade is the foundation upon which Mormonism, as it currently manifests, at least in the state of Utah, is founded. And it's no coincidence that Utah is the multi-level marketing capital of the universe. And if you want to watch the Lula Road documentary on Amazon, it gives you a great insight into how modern believing Mormons have blended their doctrine with the doctrine of their religion with the American model of capitalism to convince people that their business model is good and healthy, which it is not. I found it so interesting to learn about how, because everyone, not just Kirtland, this was a nationwide recession in 1837. I thought it was interesting that it said that when all was said and done, the rise and fall of the bank brought very little actual change to Kirtland's economy. Now, that may have been true in Kirtland, but what I thought of in our time is remembering that during the pandemic of COVID-19 last year and this year as well, reports have come out suggesting that the world's wealthiest people have done nothing but increase their wealth by several magnitudes. And you know who else has increased their wealth by several magnitudes? The church's investments. And that's really smart that the church has money to invest. But as someone from my disposition, I have to say I'm really concerned about the fact that the Mormon church is able to evade taxes because they're a religious institution. They don't have to provide any sort of financial accountability, or at least it's a very skeletal, bare bones sort of accountability for their finances, and they get to take sacred tithing funds that could be used to purposes of humanitarian benefit that could help the world, and instead buy shares of Facebook and Google and Ford and GameStop. And a lot of the apologetics I've seen for that on the internet are like, why are you mad that the church is just good at handling their money? Like, if you're not investing, then you're just dumb. Like, you're not just going to put that in a savings account. I have no problem with the church being wise financial stewards and taking very seriously the sacred funds that are given to them. My problem is people are giving sacred donations upwards of 10% of their gross annual income before taxes to a church that is not using that money to materially benefit them. And they say that in order to stay financially solvent, they need the church members themselves to receive no compensation for any of the callings, which is actually one of the things that bring average Mormons the most pride is that, oh, we don't pay our clergy. That's not a flex. People need to realize that the incompetence of many sacrament meetings, which have it's a hit and miss at a Mormon church service. You could go and have really good speakers, and you can go and it could be the worst 45 minutes of your life, and there's just no way to tell because nobody is paid to give those sermons, which also means that different wards and different doctrinal spiritual classes can develop their own spiritual monoculture, and it's just not even correlated anymore. At any rate, let's go on. I think that there are a lot of problems in the modern church, and this chapter really gives us an idea of the church being founded on running away from paying debt. Joseph Smith, between June 1837 and April 39, goes to court, or at least is served 13 different legislations, all asking for compensation, for him to pay back his loan. And I don't know. I have a student loan for my college degree, and I feel kind of horrific about trying to pay back one loan, let alone dozens from different people around the country. That would drive me into madness. And so when the bank finally goes up in flames and it fails, I think I love seeing the people fight back and go, the prophet is fallible. The prophet screwed us over. You said in the name of God that the Kirtland Safety Society was divinely revealed. And so you have to contend with the fact that it failed. And if it was revealed by God and it failed within a month, and it failed because of the national recession of 1937, which affected everyone else in the United States of America at that time, then you have to contend with the fact that God is either incompetent or there's no good way for a person that does not believe in Mormonism to say anything good. There's no way you can say anything good without having to do a tremendous amount of mental gymnastics to reconcile that God's revealed bank failed harder or as hard as every other bank in the country. So if that's the God you think is going to prevent the Babylonians from sieging Israel and taking you into captivity, I think you're betting on the wrong God if he can't help your bank do at least as well, if not better, than other banks contemporarily. And Parley Pratt says to Joseph Smith, "Are you going to pay me back and be an honest man, or will you take advantage of your neighbor because he is in your power?" This is one of the biggest times of grievances against Joseph Smith is 1838, 1837. The grievances that came as the fall of the Kirtland Safety Society shook their community. You've got a lot of people finally willing to say enough is enough. This is an outrage. This is a moral outrage. It's indefensible, and Joseph Smith is to blame. Joseph Smith says that anyone who wants to get into the court system will be excommunicated. So obviously very few people are willing to go to those lengths. And there are people, it says that Grandison Newell was the most bellicose anti-Mormon in Ohio, so you can decide for yourself whether it's a trustworthy source, but this person is using the local newspaper to say that Joseph Smith, he has two men named Denton and Davis, two named men, Joseph sends to harass and kill Grandison Newell for spilling the beans about the true nature of Joseph Smith and the failures that were happening in Kirtland. So I'm inclined to believe that where there's smoke, there's a fire, and we know from the times in Nauvoo that Joseph Smith absolutely was involved in those sort of shady, taking matters into our own hands, justice sort of things. There's a lot of ways you can protect your reputation, and bullying people and doing things under the table is one option. So I'm not so dubious that I would say that claim does not have merit. Yeah. So I love this. The best way to ensure the loyalty of his men, the people that are up in arms, the loyalty of his men was to send them on missions where they could lose their petty grievances in preaching the purity of the gospel. That is such a funny pattern. Hey, everyone just needs to get some fresh air. Why don't you go take a vacation with your wife? Go to Florida or whatever. No, it's, you know what'll make you feel better? Me telling you to depart from your family and go serve a mission across the seas. What? Oh man, and the sway that Joseph Smith had over people. I can't describe how interesting it is to me that people saw the fall of the Kirtland Safety Society. Like, Joseph Smith in his own journal wrote, I think this is the end, or it appears as though this was the end, that all of the last 7 years of building this community had fallen overnight. And I find myself gobsmacked that they made it out and that the church survived. They always seem to survive. It's like a cockroach. You just can't stamp them under your feet. They will survive nuclear radiation and everything in between. So, yeah, Joseph Smith gets so lucky that it's not just the Kirtland Safety Society, it's everywhere in the nation. And so people go, oh, it's not actually Joseph Smith being a fraudster and putting up this fake facade of a bank and corrupting us all. It's everyone is suffering, so he's not to blame. He got so lucky. I think if it had just been isolated in Kirtland, it would have been a lot worse, and a lot more people would not have been able or willing to reconcile themselves back into the good graces of Joseph Smith. I love this story of Joseph Smith coming back from Canada, and there's this prophetess that has her own stones, and it's important to remember that the origins of Mormonism are in folk magic. So the three witnesses of the Book of Mormon, David Whitmer, Martin Harris, and Oliver Cowdery, who the book says whose faith in seer stones had not diminished when Joseph stopped using them, they fall under the spell of this seeress who is using a black stone in which she could read the future. And she dances herself into a state of exhaustion before her followers. That's kind of like the Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, or at least that imagery of the young maiden imbued with spiritual energy dancing until she collapses from exhaustion. Yeah, very interesting. It's so frustrating that Joseph Smith shuts this down, in the sense that it just illustrates the extent to which he was interested in promoting his own power in his church as him being the only person through whom God could speak. But yeah, it's hard to imagine how charismatic he must have been to get other people to stop having revelations, and get people to stop believing them. The three witnesses of the Book of Mormon, who to their dying breath claimed they saw the gold plates, are people that would probably tell you at that time that this prophetess was just as revelatory and spiritually significant as anything Joseph Smith ever did. So I think that's interesting. I think that reading this chapter, I think that this would make an awesome HBO show. I think in a previous commentary I said this story of Joseph Smith would make an awesome movie. I think it was the Solomon Spaulding trying to find the manuscript, which would also be great. But this episode, if there was an HBO series called Kirtland, or even No Man Knows My History, like a 12-part miniseries or something, I think that more people outside of demographically centered Mormon areas deserve to know about this history, because it's so fascinating and so fun to read, and it's so juicy. There's so much drama. So I love that Oh yeah, okay. So Warren Parrish is one of the people that's heavily critical towards the church. There's a press. The printing press is burned, and Warren Parrish, accuses Joseph of committing the arson or giving the order to burn the printing press so that negative news about him would not reach Kirtland. And this is not the first time, or maybe this is the first time, sorry, but it is not the last time that Joseph Smith is accused and found guilty of ordering a burning or a destruction of a printing press, which of course we'll get into when we talk about Nauvoo. So Warren Parrish says this. I love what he says about Joseph Smith and the leaders of the church. They lie by revelation, run away by revelation, and if they do not mend their ways, I fear they will at last be damned by revelation. That is a great quote to end that chapter. I think, again, same with the gilded facade of the banknotes. I think that quote can be just as relevant to the leaders of today's Mormon church as it ever has been in his contemporary times. That's all I've got. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll get into chapter 15.